Have you ever truly paused to reflect on why some women live alone? Not out of despair, nor from lack, nor in response to heartbreak, but by deliberate, inwardly anchored choice. This is not the story of a woman abandoned by love. It is the story of a woman who, in choosing solitude, begins to dismantle the inherited myths of what it means to be female, desired, fulfilled. This is not about absence, but presence. A woman who lives alone is not disappearing from the world. She is returning to herself. And that return, unlike the tales told in fairy tales or social scripts, does not seek validation in the gaze of another. It is not adorned with public applause, romantic certainty, or external affirmation. It is carved in silence. It is anchored in self-possession. It is a path of individuation, of peeling away the persona that says she must be partnered to be whole, or pleasing to be safe. This journey of solitary self-discovery, though quiet, shakes the very ground of collective belief. For in solitude, a woman meets the rawest parts of herself, not only the light she was praised for, but the shadow she was told to suppress. And through this confrontation, she becomes someone rare, a woman who no longer burns herself just to keep others warm. She is not cold. She has simply withdrawn from the fire that consumed her. She is not alone because no one wanted her. She is alone because she has awakened to the sacred difference between being wanted and being seen. As Carl Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And when a woman chooses to live without a man, it is not a rejection of love, but a reclamation of the kind of love that begins within. Her solitude is not a void. It is a temple. And what she builds there is not isolation, but the unshakable foundation of her authentic self. There is something profoundly unsettling about a woman who does not derive her wholeness from romantic attachment, because in her quiet defiance, she dismantles centuries of conditioned dependence, breaks the ancestral chain of emotional servitude, and exposes a truth the collective psyche struggles to accept. She is not merely single, she is sovereign. And that sovereignty is not loud, it is unnerving. For when a woman no longer seeks to be saved, she becomes the mirror in which many men cannot find their usual role. And many women, still awakening from inherited scripts, are startled by the reflection staring back. A reflection that says, "You were never incomplete to begin with." Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." These women, often judged or misunderstood, are not a rejection of love. They are a rejection of dependency disguised as affection. They embody the shadow the world denies. The woman who no longer performs for approval, who no longer shapes herself to be palatable, who does not barter her essence for belonging. In a culture obsessed with being chosen, she has chosen herself, and in that choice, she becomes radical. She does not beg to be seen. She becomes the kind of presence that cannot be ignored. She does not chase connection. She cultivates inner peace. While others rush to fill the silence, she walks into it willingly, knowing that it is within that sacred quiet that her truest voice emerges. She is not here to entertain the fairy tale of rescue. She is here to reclaim the parts of herself that were once lost in pleasing, performing, and proving. And perhaps that is why she unsettles the world. Because she does not play by its emotional economics. She no longer trades herself for crumbs of affection. She has found something more enduring, the unshakable foundation of self-possession. Her solitude is not a void to be pitied. It is a statement, a declaration that fulfillment is not something given. It is remembered, cultivated, and lived. And those who cannot understand her often label her, fearing what she represents, a woman whose love is not an open wound, but a quiet revolution. She is not waiting for love. She is waiting for the kind of love that does not ask her to fold herself into something smaller. She no longer hungers for attachment that distorts her essence, or demands her silence in exchange for companionship. Until that rare, expansive love appears, if it ever does, she remains rooted, sovereign, and whole within herself. Perhaps to some, this seems like pride masked as independence, or unresolved pain cloaked in self-reliance. But beneath the surface of that judgment lies an unspoken question, a quiet, almost inconvenient whisper inside many hearts. What if the path we call lonely is actually the only path that leads to the love we've been unconsciously seeking all along? The love that begins not with another, but within the sacred container of the self. The silence that surrounds a woman who chooses to live alone is not a void, it is a temple. It is not an absence to be filled, but a space she has carved out to meet the forgotten parts of herself. And yes, it may unsettle those who are used to women who shrink, women who bend, women who bleed themselves dry in the name of being chosen. To those eyes, she may appear distant, aloof, or intimidating, but that fortress around her, it was never meant to keep love out. It was built to protect the sanctity of a soul that once lost itself in too many places that could not hold her. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that we do not confront in ourselves, we will meet as fate." This woman has stopped outsourcing her fate. While many are still seeking salvation in the eyes of another, she turned inward, into the shadowed corners of her own psyche, into the forgotten attics of her childhood, where unmet needs gathered dust and silence. She sat with ghosts most people run from, abandonment dressed as affection, dependency mistaken for devotion, and that deep ache of needing to be needed. Her solitude is not a wound. It is a healed scar, a mark of initiation. She did not stop believing in love, she simply stopped accepting imitations of it. The kind of love that demanded her disappearance. What she now calls love must be wide enough to hold her entire being. Wild and soft, intuitive and self-possessed, vulnerable yet untamed. And until that love arrives, she will not shrink. She will not chase, she will not trade her soul for belonging, because the greatest love story she's living is the one she finally found within. This woman has walked through fire. She has been to the edge of herself and watched the parts she once gave away dissolve into silence. She knows the chaos of loving too deeply and receiving too little. She remembers the ache of waiting for affection that never arrived, of offering her soul in handfuls only to be met with absence. She has begged at emotional doorsteps where she should have never knelt. But then, gradually, not with a loud thunderclap, but with quiet disillusionments that no longer broke her but began to awaken her, she rose. Her transformation was not dramatic, but alchemical. One betrayal at a time became a lesson. One heartbreak at a time became a mirror. One silence too many became the threshold of her awakening. What you witness now is not emotional detachment, it is sovereignty. It is not coldness, it is clarity. She no longer chases noise because she has learned the language of presence. And presence, real presence, is rare. She no longer seeks company for the sake of filling space. She craves reciprocity. The sacred meeting of two souls who do not use each other as a crutch, but as mirrors of truth. She is no longer seduced by promises, by poetic words spun with no weight. She listens for energy now, for the soundless resonance of someone who has sat with their own darkness and come out whole. So yes, she may seem unreachable to those who approach her with masks, not because she is closed, but because she has become a gatekeeper of her own peace. She does not seek rescue, she seeks recognition. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." She has taken that privilege seriously. To be seen, truly seen, requires depth. And to go to that depth demands courage. The courage to meet her, not just at the surface, but where the soul begins. Many will turn back at that threshold, not because she is too much, but because she is whole, and wholeness is a mirror, one that reflects everything the other has not yet faced within themselves. When a woman reaches this state of inner completion, she becomes a paradox, revered and feared. She inspires those who are walking toward their own integration. She unsettles those still living fractured, waiting to be completed by another. But she is not here to be anyone's missing piece. She is here to overflow, to share, not to fix or fill. So until that sacred meeting arrives, she walks alone, not as a victim of circumstance, but as a guardian of her soul's integrity. Her solitude is not loneliness, it is a devotion, a vow to never again abandon herself in the name of love. And that, more than anything, is the quiet revolution she lives every single day. This woman is not in hiding, she is in preservation. And that distinction, though subtle, is radical. To the unconscious eye, her silence may appear like retreat, but it is a sacred act of self-respect. It is not fear that guides her solitude, but discernment. In a world that still worships the myth that happiness arrives only in pairs, her very existence becomes an act of rebellion. This world, conditioned to see partnership as the pinnacle of worth, often misreads her sovereignty as failure, as if choosing oneself were an admission of inadequacy rather than the deepest declaration of self-trust. Carl Jung once observed that where convention rules, there is little room for authenticity. And this woman has no interest in conventions that shrink the soul. She no longer trades her essence for acceptance. She no longer bends herself into roles sculpted by societal expectation. She listens to the old voices, "You're too picky, you're too closed, no one is perfect," and meets them not with anger, but with a quiet, ironic grace, because what they call too much is simply the boundary she has fought to reclaim. What they call unrealistic is just the standard she once abandoned in fear, but now protects in wisdom. She is not searching for someone perfect. She is searching for someone whole. For someone who has walked the inner terrain she herself has mapped, who has confronted their shadow and returned not broken, but integrated. And that kind of presence, that kind of partnership, is not found in the noise of the world. It is rare. And she would rather wait in silence than settle into chaos disguised as love. The unease she provokes has little to do with her words. It comes from her presence. She does not ask for power, yet she holds it. She does not demand attention, yet she draws it. She does not try to change others, yet her very being invites confrontation with their illusions, their dependencies, their unhealed wounds. Her happiness without a partner unmasks a painful truth for many. That contentment is possible without permission. That wholeness is not granted by another. It is reclaimed from within. Men who once thrived on female insecurity feel disarmed. Women who still anchor their value in being chosen feel exposed. But she is not here to disturb them. She is simply being. And in that being she becomes a mirror. A symbol of liberation for those ready to awaken, and a quiet discomfort for those still shackled by roles they no longer question. Her life is not a protest. It is a return to essence, to depth, to truth. And in that return, she reclaims the power that was hers all along. This woman moves by her own rhythm, a rhythm not dictated by urgency, validation, or societal timelines. She is not in a rush, because she is not performing. She is not here to please, but to be present. And in a culture intoxicated with immediacy, addicted to results and obsessed with appearances, her stillness feels like rebellion. She respects her own timing, and that unshakable self-honoring stirs a silent discomfort in a world that fears what it cannot control. While others chase the fleeting dopamine of distraction, she hungers for depth. While many exchange moments for likes, she longs for bonds forged in the fire of real presence. She does not crave attention, she craves truth. Her no is not an invitation to pursue, it is a boundary. Her withdrawal is not drama, it is sacred preservation. And when she chooses solitude over a connection that starves the soul, it is not pride. It is the hard-earned clarity of someone who has tasted chaos and chosen peace. That clarity, born not from theory but from scars, is her quiet revolution, because she no longer exists to entertain or fulfill others' projections. She exists to be. And in a world that profits from your insecurity, a woman who simply is, without apology, without the need to be chosen, becomes dangerous. What unsettles people most is not that she is alone, it is that she is whole in that aloneness, not lonely, not waiting, not bitter, but radiant in the stillness of her own becoming. Carl Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And she has awakened. Through the raw, unglamorous process of descent, she descended into herself, into the shadows, into the places where neediness once masqueraded as love, where approval once stood in for worth. She removed the mask, stared into the mirrors she once avoided, and sat with the parts of herself no one applauded. And through that inner pilgrimage, she rebuilt herself, not as an image, but as a truth. She no longer asks others to reflect her value back to her. She sees herself through the eyes of her own soul, and that shift changes everything. Because when a woman no longer derives her identity from being wanted, admired, or needed, when she claims her worth as inherent, she becomes unshakable. Not because life stops testing her, but because she no longer betrays herself to belong. How many times has the question haunted you? Is solitude a sign of failure, or is it a hidden form of freedom? How many moments have you hesitated, feeling the silent pressure to explain your aloneness, as if being without a partner made you somehow incomplete in a world that glorifies coupledom, even when it's hollow, performative, or full of silent suffering? This woman has known that question well. She once internalized the belief that her solitude was a flaw, a reflection of unworthiness. She too absorbed the unspoken rule that a woman alone is a woman lacking. But something within her shifted, painfully, gradually, and then unmistakably. One day, in the stillness of her own being, she awakened to a truth more liberating than any romance could offer. It is better to be alone in your truth than to vanish inside a relationship that erases you. And from that revelation, she made a sacred vow to herself. A vow not spoken aloud, but carved into the bones of her soul. Never again would she settle for anything that cost her her selfhood. Her journey is not linear, it is spiral, cyclical, lunar. There are still days that ache, moments when nostalgia returns like a familiar ghost, whispering old promises. There are nights of piercing silence, where the absence feels like a question. But there is also a rising power, forged in fire and refined through choice. With every boundary drawn from awareness, her spirit expands. She has learned that love, in its truest form, does not confine or consume. It does not manipulate or mask itself as salvation. The love she now yearns for and patiently waits for is the kind that liberates, the kind that meets her not in lack, but in wholeness. And until that love arrives, she chooses to continue evolving alone, not out of pride, but out of reverence for her integrity. She is no longer walking the path of dependency. She walks the ancient road of individuation, the very process Carl Jung described as the return to the self, the reclamation of one's fragmented soul. She faced the darkness not as a victim, but as a seeker. She met her shadow in the silence. She descended into the depths of the unconscious and emerged not unscathed, but aware. She has remembered herself, and because of that, she can no longer be half of anything. She is not looking to be completed. She seeks communion, not compensation. She desires a connection rooted in mutual consciousness, not a rescue from loneliness. And that terrifies many, because her presence demands emotional maturity. She no longer plays the game of passive longing or masked performance. She loves, or she walks. And if she walks alone today, it is not a wound, it is a wisdom. Each step echoes with discernment. Each no is not resistance, it is devotion to her own becoming. Every silence she chooses is not absence, it is sacred protection. She does not explain, she does not beg, she does not convince. She lives in clarity now, and that, more than anything, is her quiet revolution. She is not who she once was, the woman who bent to be chosen, who begged for love, who feared her own emptiness. Something inside her shattered. But it was that very fracture that opened the door to her freedom, because sometimes, only in collapse does the soul discover its new architecture. And from those ruins she rose, not armored, but illuminated. Carl Jung once said, "The tree that grows to heaven must also have roots that reach down to hell." This is not just poetic metaphor, it is the exact journey she endured. She did not simply choose solitude. She descended into the underworld of her own psyche, into the ancestral pain of women who came before her. She confronted the inherited myths of servitude, the wounds passed down silently through generations. She faced the shadows not just of her own heartbreak, but of all the forgotten women who were taught to endure instead of evolve. She shattered those scripts. She stopped performing in roles that drained her essence, She ceased believing that love must come wrapped in self-sacrifice. And when she stopped settling, the world panicked. It labeled her defiant, cold, difficult, but she stood firm. Not with arrogance, but with an ancient knowing that rose through her bone, first uncertain, then aware, and finally sovereign. Because a woman who has looked into her own abyss no longer fears the emptiness of absence. She has learned to be her own source of warmth. Her solitude is not exile, it is sanctuary. She is not unreachable, she is simply unviolated. She no longer opens her gates for those who come wearing masks. There is a profound difference between opening the heart and being torn apart. She opens, yes, but only to those who move with truth, not performance. Her intuition now speaks louder than flattery. Her energy, refined by silence, acts as a sacred gatekeeper. She can feel deception before it speaks. She can sense hollowness beneath polished words, and when it appears, she leaves not in bitterness, but in deep clarity. For her transformation is not surface, it is archetypal. She has touched something primal, something eternal. An ancient wisdom lives in her blood now, a memory that women were not born to serve, but to be. Not to be shaped, but to overflow. And when she awakened to that truth, a wild, sacred woman emerged, untamed, intuitive, emotionally sovereign. Though alone, she is not lost. She is in communion with something vaster than society's approval, her own inner destiny. Try as the world might to reduce her with tired labels, too cold, too much, too proud, nothing sticks anymore, because she no longer lives to belong, she lives to become. She no longer begs for space, she radiates presence. She doesn't seek to be chosen, she chooses. And that reversal of logic, of energy, unsettles a world built on taming the feminine. But she has already crossed the threshold. She has returned to herself. And on that sacred return, she discovered what few dare to embody, that the deepest love does not come to fill her. It comes to overflow. She doesn't chase applause. She doesn't need public approval. Her confidence whispers in stillness. And within that stillness, her truest strength resides. Jung wrote, "Everything that we face within becomes our destiny." And perhaps that is why this woman, who has chosen herself over and over again, now authors of fate many cannot understand, but many secretly envy. She no longer tries to fill voids with fantasy. She no longer pleads to be enough. She knows, deep in her soul, that presence is never something to be begged for, and when it is not offered in truth, she simply declines. Not in anger, but with the serene dignity of someone who has been lost in false love too many times to go blind again. Still, what few people see is that she does long for love. She still aches to be held, to be seen, to be chosen, but not at the price of fragmentation. She has outgrown the cages of conditioned affection. She no longer compresses herself to fit into hearts too small for the soul she carries. She now offers herself only where her fullness can breathe. Not from pride, but from reverence. Because to love from wholeness, you must first protect the wholeness within. She is the living embodiment of Jung's individuation. She has shed her masks, she has embraced her opposites, her light and her shadow, and walked herself home. Now she no longer seeks to complete or be completed. She yearns to share. And this confuses those who still equate love with possession. Because her love does not come to dominate or disappear. It comes to stand beside, to witness, to grow, to liberate. She wants a soul alliance, not a romantic illusion. A bond in which both partners can unfold without betrayal to their own becoming. If that feels like too much to some, so be it. She'd rather wait than starve on emotional crumbs. What they call arrogance is, in truth, sacred self-regard. We are not simply watching a woman live alone. We are witnessing the rise of a new feminine archetype. A woman who no longer compromises her truth for belonging. A woman who no longer flirts with silence just to avoid being alone. A woman who no longer dances to earn love. She has stopped being desired and started being respected. She did not give up on love. She gave up on the lies that came dressed as it. She realized that real love does not ask for her disappearance. And in that realization, her world cracked open. Now, her voice does not have to be loud to be heard. Her very presence shifts the atmosphere, not because she demands attention, but because she no longer betrays her energy to earn it. And that shift, subtle, deep and undeniable, is not mysticism, it is power. The sacred power of a woman who has walked through inner war and returned in peace, not because she conquered her darkness, but because she chose to sit beside it without shame. Jung once said that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration. And that is what she has done. She no longer amputates parts of herself to be loved. She now brings her fullness to the table. Her rage and tenderness, her silence and song, her wounds and wisdom. She no longer begs to be enough. She is. And she will not accept a love that asks her to dim, to fold, or to disappear. If love comes, it must come as truth, as depth, as presence. And if not, she waits. Not in despair, but in devotion to the sacred self she has become. Yes, the world will continue to tempt her with shallow attachments, quick validations and conditional love. But she has seen through the veil. She knows now. It was never about finding someone. It was about never losing herself again. And when that truth anchors in the soul, everything transforms. Desire becomes discernment. Lack becomes power. Loneliness becomes initiation. And the pain of the past becomes the prophecy of rebirth. So if something stirred within you while reading this, perhaps a quiet memory, a forgotten ache, a buried longing, listen. It may not be just her story. It may be your own awakening calling from within, a signal that you too are ready. Ready for a love that begins not with possession, but with presence. Not with compromise, but with consciousness. A love that doesn't silence your soul, but sings in harmony with it. She walks alone, but not in isolation. She walks with herself, and after everything, that is more than enough. The love that finds her now will not be her rescue, it will be her reflection, not a salvation, but a celebration. If something within you stirred while hearing this message, do not let it fade. Share it with someone whose soul might also be quietly crying for awakening. And if you feel called to continue this inner journey, this unraveling of old patterns and quiet rebuilding of self, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Remember this. Love is not a treasure waiting to be found. It is a sacred fire you learn to tend within, patiently, consciously, and with great care. And that act of inner creation begins not tomorrow, but in this very moment. Thank you for walking this path with me. You are not alone in this. I'll meet you in the next video where we go even deeper. Until then, stay awake and stay true.